again, welcome everyone. Ian Mitchell, Catholic Campaign for Human Development. And this session is going to be a discussion of Fratelli, Tutti, Pope Francis's recent teaching, and a wonderful group that the Catholic Campaign for Human Development is working with at present. So for those who don't know, Catholic Campaign for Human Development is the domestic anti-poverty program of the US Catholic bishops. And CCHD helps people experiencing poverty and marginalization to participate in decisions that affect their lives, families, and communities. And it nurtures solidarity between people living in poverty and their neighbors. As you probably know, in Pope Francis's recent teaching, Fratelli Tutti, on fraternity and social friendship, he reminds us that it is an act of charity to assist someone suffering, but it's also an act of charity, even if we do not know the person, to work to change the social conditions that caused his or her suffering. And that really is the mission of CCHD, changing social conditions that cause poverty and suffering. And we've been doing this for 50 years now, and that's 50 years of generous Catholics around the country making possible CCHD's support for initiatives that empower families, immigrants, new mothers, the elderly, and those in need to become active participants in their communities. The organization supported by CCHD have been working for decades to address the racial and economic disparities that, only have been revealed in new ways by the COVID-19 crisis. And as we look forward to the daunting task of rebuilding now and to thriving in the aftermath of the pandemic, and joining the renewed calls for just systems and structures, CCHD really is more vital than ever. So today we will hear from some leaders in our community from the Coalition for Spiritual and Public Leadership in Chicago. Each year, a portion of the funds that Catholics contribute to CCHD is kept in local dioceses to support new and emerging work of community development. The coalition has received funding support through the local CCHD program of the Archdiocese of Chicago. And national CCHD staff have been inspired by the strong community the coalition has already developed in its first few years. So we look forward to seeing how CCHD and all of us might be able to collaborate with them more in the future. So this evening, we have a chance to hear from leaders who are helping to transform their communities and to imagine how we can stand in even stronger solidarity with them, with our sisters and brothers in our own communities also. And I'd now like to introduce Michael Akinsich Cruz, co-founder and executive director of the Coalition for Spiritual and Public Leadership. So welcome, Michael. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ian. It's good to be with you. And Rosette, Sue, and I are really honored to be here with you all today. We've prepared a presentation that we're very excited about called Fratelli Tutti and Community Organizing. Before we get started with this brief presentation and before you get to hear from Rosette and Sue, who are two leaders at CSPL on the front lines of our work, I wanted to just briefly share a little bit about CSPL, the Coalition for Spiritual and Public Leadership. CSPL is a not-for-profit, multiracial, multi-ethnic, grassroots-led coalition that includes parishes, institutions, and communities that work together to address racial, social, economic, and environmental injustice by building power, grassroots power, people power that is rooted in the vision of the gospel of Jesus Christ. CSPL trains and develops faith leaders in their respective congregations and institutions to enter into public life in a manner that is strategic, communal, and grounded in the Catholic spiritual and theological traditions. So today we've been asked to talk about Fratelli Tutti, and not only to talk about Fratelli Tutti, but to talk about our work, our organizing work on the ground in light of COVID-19. So our members and our staff have prepared this presentation. And so we thought that this would be a good opportunity to talk and highlight some of the key themes in this beautiful encyclical by Pope Francis. So first, let's start by describing a little bit of what is Fratelli Tutti. And so this was a very helpful description of what this encyclical attempts to accomplish. So I'm going to read here very quickly. What are the great ideals, but also the tangible ways to advance for those who wish to build a more just and fraternal world in their ordinary relationships, in social life, politics, and institutions? This is mainly the question that Fratelli Tutti is intended to answer. The encyclical aims to promote a universal aspiration toward fraternity and social friendship. In the background of the encyclical is the COVID-19 pandemic, which Francis reveals unexpectedly erupted as he was writing this letter. But the global health emergency has helped demonstrate that no one can face life in isolation, and that the time has truly come to dream then as a single human family in which we are brothers and sisters all. So for us, we actually just reflected on the theme of Fratelli Tutti at our membership meeting back in January, right after the holidays. We came back together after a brief respite and break in time for prayer after many months of working together during this pandemic. And we highlighted 4 things that we discussed at our last membership meeting in mid-January. The first is that from Fratelli Tutti, Pope Francis signals that we have the COVID-19 pandemic. We all know this, but Pope Francis also states that there are multiple pandemics at play. There are the pandemics of racism, xenophobia, and economic exploitation. In other words, our world is sick and needs to be cured. But what is that cure? How do we cure the world? How are we, as what Francis calls social poets of change, how are we to go about that work of bringing the reign of God here on earth? And so the second key takeaway from this document is that changing our world begins with genuine and authentic human encounters. In Spanish, we call this the Encuentro. Genuine listening and empathy are the first steps to fostering relationships, community, and solidarity. Encounters inspire genuine acts of love, mercy, and justice. Pope Francis speaks of the parable of the Good Samaritan as a primary example of this. And just a tad bit about this photo. This came from a training, a pre-COVID training, in case you're wondering, that we held at Dominican University, one of our key member partners at CSPL. And these 2 young people learned how to do what we call in community organizing a one-on-one, where they're intentional about hearing each other's stories, building a relationship as they get to know one another and what motivates them to work for justice in the world. And this highlights another thing, in that social change is not about understanding abstract ideas simply intellectually, that in order to solve poverty, we have to understand poverty at a basic human level, that we have to be in community. Either we ourselves who are impoverished need to be at the forefront of that work, but those who seek to be involved in anti-poverty work need to be in deep, authentic relationship with those who are leading the work against poverty. That there's an encounter that enables all of us to better understand what we're working against and what we're working for. The second key takeaway is, again, comes back to this idea that there are multiple pandemics. And one that Francis pays particular attention to is that there are vast inequalities in the world today, and that these inequalities are a moral and spiritual scandal. God's gifts, as Francis says, are meant to be shared. It is unconscionable that so few people control such incredible wealth, land, and power, while so many millions of people are left without income, land, housing, healthcare, and other basic necessities. Francis says our politics and our economy, that the way things are working is not working for everybody, and that we, as sowers of change, must work to change it. The last takeaway is that honoring and preserving local traditions and cultures is essential, especially as global migration, oftentimes forced migration, is taking place. And we see that there is often a gradual thinning of cultural traditions, that this often occurs as a result of domestic instabilities, globalization, and international exploitation that forces people to move from their homelands to other homelands. And in many cases, When people and entire communities are forced to relocate to nations where assimilation happens, this leads to disruption and a loss of cherished traditions and cultural values. I know this from firsthand experience. My father being a refugee from Poland, my mother being Mexican American, I, as their son, have had to fight to preserve my own cultural traditions. Rosette can speak to this as well as an immigrant herself. Sue, as the daughter of a refugee, from Iraq, can share to this as well, that we have to preserve these cultural traditions in our communities, in our households. So these are the four main takeaways. I want to hand it over to Rosette and Sue, who are going to share now, but I want to finish with a quote, because this theme of solidarity comes up time and time again in Francis's encyclical, but also in the book that he recently wrote, Let Us Dream. This book is very powerful, it's very evocative, and I recommend it to everybody here with us today. This quote comes from Fratelli, Tutti. Solidarity means much more than engaging in sporadic acts of generosity. It means thinking and acting in terms of community. It means that the lives of all are prior to the appropriation of goods by a few. It also means combating the structural causes of poverty, inequality, the lack of work, land, and housing, the denial of social and labor rights. It means confronting the destructive effects of the empire of money. Solidarity, understood in its most profound meaning, is a way of making history. And this is what popular movements are doing. What a powerful statement from Francis here. Now, I believe we're going to hear from Sue next.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us. So I just want to let you know that I am with the Coalition for Spiritual and Public Leadership and one of three leaders who had the Immigration Committee. And so we've been together working for 3.5 years. So I want to set the stage for you about the work that we had been doing during the pandemic. So if you go back to the summer, June 2020, Illinois is in a pandemic lockdown. And we are located in Proviso Township in Illinois, which is western suburbs of Chicago. And there are 14 municipalities in the township. And one of those municipalities is Maywood. And in the south part of Maywood is Loyola Medical Center, which is both a hospital and a teaching medical university. And so by seeing the patients in their clinics and at the hospital, Loyola clinicians realized that COVID-19 infection rates are well above the state average in two of the municipalities, and that's Maywood and Melrose Park. And not coincidentally, both of those municipalities have a high poverty rate and are populated primarily by people of color. So the doctors and students at Loyola from the COVID Equity Response Collaborative at Loyola, and that takes the acronym CIRCLE, CERCL, and they joined together, these doctors and students, and their object was to slow the spread of disease, particularly in Maywood and in Melrose Park. And so once they had formed themselves a circle, the Loyola medical students reached out to the coalition and they asked us to help them find open air sites in order to do COVID testing in Melrose Park and Maywood. And they gave us a deadline of starting testing at the end of July. So we in the coalition, as well as the Loyola students, had roughly 4 weeks to put all the pieces together. And there were a lot of pieces we had to consider to make this happen. So our immigration committee, we rallied ourselves and called our community contacts, and we were able to secure open air testing sites at Our Lady of Mount Carmel Church, a Catholic church in Melrose Park, and Rock of Ages Baptist Church in Maywood. And we did meet the desired deadline. We opened our open air testing as desired on the last week of July in 2020. Both sites had walk-up and drive-through testing. Volunteer doctors and nurses performed the nasal swab testing. Medical students would take the histories from the patients. There was no charge and no appointments for any of this testing. Originally, we had scheduled the testing was be 3 hours, one afternoon a week at each site. So twice a week, 3 hours each. We had only 50 kits. We were limited, if you recall, at that time, getting COVID-19 testing kits was hard to do. And we scheduled 3 hours from 1 to 4 each afternoon. And there was such demand that we almost always ran out of the 50 test kits in an hour and 15 minutes. So beyond testing, the idea was to, by testing early and getting people out of circulation, that would reduce the spread of COVID-19 in Proviso Township. And so people who had positive tests received further support from groups within the Loyola organization, so they would get assistance as they isolated at home for the course of their illnesses. The open air testing continued into the fall, and then, this being Northern Illinois, we had to face the fact that the days were getting shorter and that we had snow coming. So we had to find a way to move the testing indoors. And the group did that successfully, and it has continued on to the present time. If you want, I could share a link. There was recently on Facebook an interview with the core members, and you can look at that. I can put that link, if you'd like, into a chat box, and you can watch and hear for yourselves the communication among the founders of Circle and how they continue to work together to reduce the spread of disease. And then just for us, the CSPL Immigration Committee, we're continuing to collaborate with Loyola Medical Center, and we have plans to reach into the community with information on vaccination. And this will be to encourage residents in Proviso Township, Berwyn, and Cicero, Illinois, to get vaccinated against COVID-19. Thank you. Thank you for listening. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Rosette.
Thank you, Sue. Thank you, Michael. Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for having us. I am very excited, and like Michael said, we are very humbled to be here. I'm going to try to help us understand what CSPL has been able to do this past year and this year as well, through a story. So when I was young, my dad walked up to me in the room and asked me, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" Now, I had two responses I gave him. One was that I want to be able to work and make sure that people don't have to live in poverty, to be able to help people living in unjust situations. And that's how I ended up working here at CSPL. I'm a co-chair of their Safety and Violence Committee. And so towards the end of 2019, talks started, and people were talking about money that is supposed to come into the community. And like Sue said, we work in a very impoverished community. And so my ears were all up, like, okay, how can we help the people that we're working with? And it turned out that they were talking about the census. I was shocked. Wow, the census. I mean, the earliest I've heard of the census is Jesus, the story of Jesus and Mary and Joseph having to move because of the census. And so it was very informative when CSPL started talking about the census and how much it affects the community in which we work in, how much money can come into the community just by counting people, how many people live there. And so the work started, the brainstorming started, and we had so much planned out. And then the pandemic came, which we didn't plan about. And there was a stop for a while. But I love the fact that the resilience was there. We knew we needed to get the money in for our communities. We knew we wanted better schools, we wanted better hospitals, better streets, better parks. And so we looked for another strategy, and we started phone banking. We had approximately 30 or more people helping us, volunteering, phone banking. So I was one of those. I would wake up in the morning, sit down on my bed, and I would start calling and talk to people about the census. Have they filled it out? The advantages of filling it out. And so the talk went on and on and on. And we were able to reach 20,000 and more people with our phone banking. And we were also able to collaborate with other nonprofit organizations in our community. The great thing about this is that when things started easing off a bit, we had the census tour around Proviso area. And so we were giving out PPE and helping people sign up for the census, because where we live is predominantly mixed area. And so we were trying to get as many people as possible on on there. And so that's the first thing. The second part that I responded to my dad was that I wanted to be famous. Now he looked at me and he said, "You want to be famous?" I said, "Yes, I want to be famous." I told him that if I am able to be famous, then it will be easy with that influence to draw people in and get their attention on so many social issues. It just irritated me at that age that we had so many big, well-known people and nobody really does anything significant for less opportune people. And so that was my determination. I told him I was going to be famous, and I started working towards that. But working these few years with CSPL, I have realized that we all have influence one way or another. It might not be as big as the stars who have millions of people on their calls, but the little influence that you have in your community, you have influence on your neighbor, on your siblings, you have so much influence. And that's what CSPL has been teaching the community, that we all have a voice. Our voices matter. I mean, when we look in the Bible, we see how God didn't even look for the greatest people to use. He used a small boy, a small shepherd called David, to kill a huge giant called Goliath. How much more you and I? Our platform of influence could be our classrooms, could be our workplaces, could be in our families. And so working and thinking towards that, we were able to come up with this podcast called Parting the Waters. Since we're not able to meet in person, we still wanted to make sure that the work is going on, that people are still meeting other people who think alike and coming up with solutions for normal day-to-day challenges. And so with that podcast, we've been able to have amazing people come up, talk about Catholic social teachings. We've talked about voter engagements. We've helped people understand more how much the election is not just, the presidential election is not just the most important. We also have local elections coming up. And so we've been rallying people up and working with people, making sure that people understand that we shouldn't wait for other help outside there. We might be the only help that we need in the end, with the little voice that we have, talking to another person who thinks like you, or influencing another person to start thinking like you. And hopefully the little lights and the little influence we're having with our podcast that we've been able to have with this, the census and the immigration committee, is able to bring up that light that kind of flickers around and helps people start being kinder to each other, because change doesn't just start from tearing down the system, it starts from our hearts and what we allow into our hearts. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rosette. Just to share one additional item too, Rosette and Sue have been so powerfully engaged in this work and have led so much of our efforts. There's one other quick story, and that's in Melrose Park. Sue mentioned Melrose Park. There's a hospital named Westlake Hospital. Here's a photo. Back in 2019, that hospital was purchased by a private equity firm, a private corporation that sought to initially keep that hospital open. They ended up closing that hospital in 2019, just a few months after they purchased it. There's a theme of this happening in our country, where these hospitals oftentimes are purchased in bundles, and many of those hospitals in low income or communities of color or rural poor white communities are closed. So at the beginning of the pandemic, many of the leaders and staff of CSPL got on a call, and we said, we have to organize to push our governor to reopen this hospital. So we organized a massive petition drive. We held press conferences outdoors with social distance, but this hospital was ultimately reopened by our governor, Governor Pritzker. We worked with a local representative from our area, Representative Welch, who's now the Speaker of the House of Illinois. But we provided testimonies, we organized, we pushed, because we knew that communities of color were going to be profoundly disadvantaged if we didn't work to make sure that every resource at our disposal was available. So we had successfully organized to reopen Westlake Hospital, and it still is open as a COVID treatment site currently as we continue to battle this pandemic.
Wonderful. Thank you. Michael and Sue and Ansima Rosette for the great sharing, especially Sue and Ansima Rosette for your stories of community and creativity and building relationship and finding voices and for action together, right? These are key elements of the work that Catholic Campaign for Human Development encourages, and we certainly recognize in what you were doing. We thought about possibly having some small groups in our session this evening, but I know two things. One, sometimes when you announce small groups, everybody vacates a workshop, which we don't want to see happen. We hope you'll hang around for just a few more minutes. And two, honestly, I think it would be a little rushed to do that. But Michael, if you are able to pull up in a second the few reflection questions we have, I think they are a helpful way for us to try and process a little bit of what we've heard in these great stories of community and leadership this evening. So I'll just touch on these, and I hope that they may be questions you can also take forward with you. But what jumps out at you? In a lot of ways, this work is work of communal discernment, right? And so it's important to notice what's rising up in us, in our hearts and our minds, as we encounter one another, those encounters that Pope Francis is encouraging us to. So we're thinking about what's resonated with you from particularly what Sue and Ansima Rosette have shared tonight. And then very importantly, who could you encounter and partner with in your own location, in your own home place, whether it's a parish or school? And key, Pope Francis in Fratelli Tutti, he is emphasizing how are we encountering and working with others and not only for others. And that's a subtle difference in some ways. It can go unnoticed, but it is incredibly important. It makes all the difference to the kind of work we're doing. And I think you've heard this evening, this is a community working with one another. And lastly, are there CCHD organizations in your area that you've been inspired by? We urge you to reach out to them. Groups like CSPL in Chicago need support. We can do a certain amount through CCHD, but we always need others joining the encounter and joining the discernment and action together. So we encourage you to reach out, and I'll put a resource in the box in a minute to help you find those local groups if you haven't already. But Michael, I'd like to hand back to you if you or the other leaders have any closing words for us before we get some of those final resources.
Yeah, I don't have too much to add other than that it's been inspiring to see the work that Rosette, Sue, and we have a group of 3 other leaders from CSPL meeting with the Spanish-speaking cohort right now from CSMG. But it's just been profoundly inspiring to see how so many grassroots Catholics who are involved with CSPL have responded to this pandemic through organizing around the census, through phone banking, on the ground work, outdoors, in ways that are safe while we could do that in the summertime. I think our appetite for cold temperature means that we got as much out of that summer and fall experience as we could. And Sue spoke to the incredible work that she and other immigration committee leaders have been leading and continue to lead. One thing I can share is that, Ian, maybe it's appropriate to talk about some of the action steps or ways that people can get engaged, unless you wanted to focus on anything first.
No, please, that would be good.
So we prepared a few action steps that people can take if they want to learn more or if they want to get involved somehow. One is, here's our website. It's cspplaction.org. We've also shared in the chat box ways to connect with us on social media. But we also have a link tree that's very easy to find a lot of what we've provided, including the podcast that Rosette highlighted, which is such an incredible thing to listen to. We have a podcast in English that Rosette spoke to, Parting the Waters. She's one of the co-hosts, and one in Spanish called Separando Aguas Turbulentas. But a few things that we wanted to highlight today. One is that our immigration committee, Sue and Nelly, Rosette, and others have launched a petition as we as Catholics organize for bold immigration reform. We understand we can't wait. We can't hope for the best and just let things continue to go as they have been over the last really, 10, 12 years now. This is not just recent that there's been a crisis. So we encourage you to sign that petition. Also, Sue and Rosette and others from CSPL, many students from Catholic universities that we're working with have organized a webinar that's taking place on Tuesday night at 6:30 Central Standard Time with one of the top public health experts that we know of, Dr. Ngozi Ezike. We did a community survey to really get questions from community residents, predominantly in Black and brown communities, in terms of what are their concerns or questions about the vaccines that are available. And that webinar on Wednesday will be about addressing many of these pertinent questions. It'll be in both English and Spanish. Dr. Ezike is joining us for that, and you can find the link on how to register for that. It's completely free to join us. And then again, Rosette highlighted the podcast where she and others speak to many of the most pressing issues that Catholics and young Catholics are thinking about, and their work to be social poets, as Pope Francis speaks to. So Rosette, Sue, would either of you like to add anything else?
I would just add like how fulfilling and joyful this work is. I think maybe people sometimes think that, working with the poor, or trying to work towards social justice is grim and hard work. And I guess it is sometimes hard work. But for us, the working as we are in community organizing, getting to meet people and be with them together and triumphing, having these small victories is a really joyful act. And especially for the fact that we've been able to continue as we have during this pandemic and safely continue with our campaigns is really heartening amid all of the bad news that we come into contact with every day. So I would encourage people to embrace community organizing and to do it where you live, because it is so fulfilling and so enriching for me and other people.
Wonderful. Ansima?
Thank you. I would mirror the same as Sue and just say that it has been more than fulfilling. I think when you serve, you remind yourself that you are serving God. Jesus talks when he talks to his disciples, he says that when you will come for judgment, he'll tell you, I was hungry and you didn't feed me. I was naked, you didn't clothe me. I was in prison, you didn't visit me. And so the work that we do is just, it's more than just helping somebody find their voice and the community feel empowered. It's helping God bring his justice here on earth. It's allowing ourselves to be vessels through which God can manifest his glory and his justice and his power and his love through. And for me, it has been more than an honor to have such a great God use me the little way he has in my community. And I think every Christian, any person who calls themselves a Christian should be serving in their community, one way or another. Maybe not like us, but looking for ways in which you can be used by God, I think is great. And so I would encourage anybody, if maybe you're not interested to work with anything that we have said, we have the Economic Justice Department, and there's so many other organizations actually that you can partner up with. And don't be afraid. It only takes that one conversation with one person to help you get into it. And so keep talking to people and finding ways in which you can be able to help the community where you reside. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, listen, I think as we move to conclude, I think we've really had a great gift in spending time with Sue and Ansima Rosette and Michael, and really everyone who's here. I'm sorry we didn't have time for the small groups. I did just want to close with a reminder about Pope Francis's recent teaching. Michael, if you're able to bring up those last couple of slides, just to remember that, we've been given a gift by Pope Francis in these two recent great works from October, Fratelli, Tutti, Let Us Dream in December. These are related. His teaching is related here, and I strongly encourage you to spend time with it. And his reminder really that this is a kind of, again, spiritual dialogue we enter into with works like community organizing, dialogue of action and discernment. But it's a kind of communion that we're achieving with community. We're reaching out, trying to share our faith through action for the common good. So these are beautiful works to spend time with. And on the next screen, I just wanted to offer a few ways you can follow up. I've seen some good questions about how do we find local CCHD resources in our area, and I hope these links are popping up as they are in the chat. So a couple of things for the 50th anniversary. There are dates for a celebration. The link in the chat box, if you can copy it, is a way you can sign up for reminders as soon as news comes out about registration for our 50th anniversary. For more information on our grants and programs, we have a page at usccb.org, which is a very helpful way to reach us or find some of the local groups, your local diocesan directors. And of course, Poverty USA, which has a mirror site in Spanish, is very important for understanding poverty in America, but also for finding local CCHD funded groups in your city, in your town. And we do hope you'll reach out to them and build a relationship, which is at the center of what Pope Francis is calling us to. So with that, I hope you're able to grab some of those resources as you go this evening. Hope you have a wonderful experience at the rest of the Catholic Social Ministry Gathering. And thank you for your continued support for excellent work like the Coalition for Spiritual and Public Leadership in Chicago. Thank you all. Blessings.